If you're enjoying this video, smash that like button, subscribe, and hit the bell. Share it with your friends, and let me know in the comments where you're watching from. Every like and subscribe helps the channel grow. My name is Michael O'Connor, and this happened to me in the winter of 1977. I still get chills thinking about those dark days on Mount Washington, and not just because of the cold. I was 38 then, working as a ranger and known as one of the best winter survival experts in New Hampshire. But nothing in my years of training could have prepared me for what I encountered on Frost Peak. It was the coldest winter anyone could remember. The thermometer at our ranger station kept dropping until it hit -50 degrees Fahrenheit, breaking all previous records. Something felt wrong from the start. The animals were acting strange. Deer, moose, even the hardy mountain goats were all running away from the northern slopes. We'd never seen anything like it. Then the calls started coming in. Hikers going missing, one after another. At first, we thought it was just the cruel weather claiming unprepared victims. But then we found something that made my blood freeze: half-eaten deer carcasses scattered across the snow. These weren't clean kills like you'd see from wolves or bears. No, these were different, almost human-like. I remember sitting in my cabin one night, looking over the reports when my radio crackled to life. Another group of hikers hadn't checked in. Their last known location? The northern slopes, the same area all the animals were avoiding. As I grabbed my gear and prepared to head out, I had no idea I was about to face something that would haunt me for the rest of my life. If only I'd listened to the old Obanaki woman who'd visited the station a week earlier. She'd warned us about ancient winter curses and creatures that hunted in the cold. We all smiled politely then, but none of us were smiling anymore. Sometimes I wonder if things would have been different if we'd taken her seriously from the start. The wind howls differently up there now. And when the blizzards come, I swear I can still hear those voices calling in the storm, voices of people I know are long gone. But let me tell you exactly what happened up there on Frost Peak, and why I never go into those mountains during winter anymore. My first real hint that something was terribly wrong came when I reached the missing hikers' last known campsite. The temperature had dropped even lower, if you can believe it, and the wind was cutting through my heavy winter gear like icy knives. The camp was a mess, but not in a way that made sense. The tents weren't torn up like a bear attack. They were just empty. Food was still there, hanging in trees to keep it safe from animals. But something weird caught my eye. All of it had somehow gone bad. Frozen solid, but somehow rotted at the same time. That's not normal, especially not in this cold. I found their journal in one of the tents. The last few entries made my skin crawl. They wrote about hearing voices at night, calling their names. They thought it was other hikers needing help. But each time they went to look, they found nothing but fresh snow and strange, huge footprints that seemed to disappear into thin air. The final entry really shook me up. Getting hungrier. Food doesn't help anymore. Dan's acting strange, says he keeps seeing something tall watching us from the trees. It looks human, but wrong. So wrong. I'm starting to see it too. I radioed for backup. Within an hour, my rescue team arrived. 4 of my best people: Sarah, our medical expert; Tom, ice climbing specialist; Rick, local guide; and Maria, survival expert. As we set up our base camp, the snow started falling harder. That's when we heard it, a voice calling for help, somewhere in the darkness. Sarah grabbed my arm. "Michael, that sounded like one of the missing hikers. But their camp's been empty for days. How is that possible?" I didn't have an answer. But as we stood there, listening to that voice echo across the mountain, I noticed something that made my heart stop. The voice was moving. Not like someone walking through the snow, but like it was jumping from place to place, impossibly fast. Tom pointed his flashlight into the storm. "Look," he shouted. There, in the swirling snow, we saw a shadow. It was huge, maybe 12 feet tall, and so thin it looked like a walking skeleton. But before we could get a better look, it vanished into the blizzard. That was just the beginning of our nightmare on Frost Peak. None of us knew then that we were dealing with something the local Abenaki people had feared for centuries, a creature they called the wendigo. And it was hungry. Things got worse quickly after that first night. Rick started acting strange. He wouldn't eat, kept staring into the darkness, and mumbled about being so hungry even though we had plenty of food. Every time we tried to radio for help, all we got was static and what sounded like whispers in the background. The blizzard kept getting stronger, which made no sense because the weather forecast had promised clear skies. It was like the storm was following us. Sarah found some weird markings carved into trees, old symbols that looked like warnings. When we took pictures of them, our cameras stopped working. Then Tom disappeared. We were searching a series of ice caves when it happened. 1 minute he was right behind me, the next gone. We heard his scream echo through the caves, but it seemed to come from every direction at once. While looking for him, we found something that made us all sick to our stomachs, an old mine shaft entrance with more of those symbols carved all around it. Maria recognized them from her studies. "These are Abenaki protection symbols," she said, her voice shaking. "They're meant to keep something in, not out." That night, things got even scarier. We heard Tom's voice outside our camp, calling for help. But when Sarah shined her flashlight in that direction, what we saw wasn't Tom at all. It was that tall, skeletal thing again, its skin stretched tight over bones, with black, empty eyes. It was trying to copy Tom's voice, but not quite getting it right. Rick completely lost it then. He started laughing and crying at the same time, saying he could feel the hunger taking over. Before we could stop him, he ran out into the storm. We heard his screams mix with what sounded like crackling ice and something inhuman. Maria pulled out a book she'd brought, an old journal from a local historian. "It's a wendigo," she whispered. "A human cursed by winter and hunger. It can create storms, mimic voices, and—" She paused, looking scared. "It can possess people, make them like itself." I noticed my hands were shaking as I checked our supplies. The food was all spoiled again, just like at the first camp. The temperature had dropped so low our thermometer couldn't even read it anymore. And worst of all, we were now trapped between the creature and that old mine shaft, with the storm making it impossible to call for help. Sarah grabbed my arm suddenly. "Michael," she said, pointing to our tracks in the snow. They were changing, growing longer and deeper, looking less human with each passing hour. We were running out of time, and I was starting to understand the real horror of what we were facing. This wasn't just about finding missing hikers anymore. We were fighting something ancient, something that could turn us into monsters too. We tried calling for helicopter rescue, but when it finally came through the storm, something terrible happened. The wendigo, that monster, it somehow made the blizzard worse. The helicopter started spinning out of control. We watched in horror as it crashed into the mountainside, exploding in a ball of orange fire against the white snow. Sarah was the next to show signs of the wendigo sickness. Her eyes got this weird, hungry look, and she kept talking about how good we all smelled. Maria and I had to tie her up for everyone's safety. But when morning came, the ropes were chewed through, and Sarah was gone. That's when Maria remembered something crucial from her research. "Copper," she shouted suddenly. "The old stories say wendigos can't stand copper. It burns them." We searched through our gear and found some copper wiring in our emergency repair kit. It wasn't much, but it was something. Then we heard something moving in the mine shaft. The sounds were awful, like ice cracking mixed with animal growls and human screams. Maria and I knew we had to go in. We had no choice. That thing had our friends, and maybe the missing hikers too. The mine shaft was like entering a frozen nightmare. Our flashlights showed walls covered in ice and more of those warning symbols. The deeper we went, the colder it got. Then we heard Sarah's voice behind us, but it wasn't really Sarah anymore. When we turned around, we saw her, changed, stretched, her eyes black and hungry. Maria screamed as something grabbed her from the darkness. I tried to help, but another figure emerged. It was Tom, but not Tom anymore. He had become like Sarah, twisted and wrong. They were everywhere now, transformed into smaller versions of the wendigo. I fell backward into a deeper part of the mine. When I looked up, I saw it, the real wendigo, huge and horrible, looking down at me. But then I noticed something else, old copper mining tools scattered around the floor. That's when I realized this wasn't just any mine shaft. This was an old copper mine. And maybe, just maybe, that's why the wendigo had made it its lair. Not because it wanted to be here, but because it was trapped here, surrounded by the one thing that could hurt it. I had one chance to end this nightmare, but I knew it would be the fight of my life. I grabbed an old copper pickaxe from the ground, my hands shaking from both cold and fear. The wendigo screamed, a sound that was like 100 winter storms all at once. It knew what I was holding, and for the first time, I saw fear in those black, empty eyes. Maria was still fighting, trying to hold off the transformed Sarah and Tom with a copper wire she had wrapped around her flashlight. "Michael," she yelled, "the Abenaki ritual. The sacred fire. We need fire." I remembered the old woman's warnings. Wendigos fear two things, copper and sacred fire. My hands trembled as I pulled out my emergency flares, thanking my years of ranger training for always being prepared. But these weren't just any flares. They were marine flares, burning hot enough to melt metal. The main wendigo lunged at me, its long, bony fingers reaching for my throat. I rolled to the side, feeling the icy wall against my back. The creature was incredibly fast, but in the narrow mine shaft, it couldn't move as freely as it wanted. I lit the first flare, and the mine shaft filled with bright red light. The wendigo shrieked and backed away. The transformed Sarah and Tom also retreated from the light, giving Maria a chance to run to my side. We stood together, copper tools in one hand, flares in the other. "The symbols!" Maria shouted, pointing to the walls. "We need to complete the circle." She was right. The ancient protection symbols carved into the walls formed an almost complete circle. There was just one small gap. As Maria held off our transformed friends with the copper wire, I used the copper pickaxe to quickly carve the final symbol. The moment I finished, something incredible happened. All the symbols began to glow with a strange, blue light. The wendigo roared in rage and pain. It tried to escape, but the completed circle of symbols trapped it. I threw my last lit flare directly at the creature, and at the same time, Maria tossed her copper wire. The copper and sacred fire touched the wendigo together, and there was a flash of bright light that lit up the whole mine. The creature's screech was deafening. We watched as it began to crack like ice, breaking apart piece by piece. As it shattered, the blizzard outside suddenly stopped. Sarah and Tom collapsed to the ground, slowly changing back to their normal selves. We found the missing hikers deeper in the mine, all alive but weak. As we helped everyone out, the mine shaft began to cave in behind us, burying the Wendigo's lair forever. That was 30 years ago. They fixed up the old copper mine entrance, sealed it properly. The official report says we rescued some lost hikers who were suffering from hypothermia and hallucinations. But Maria and I know what really happened. Sometimes, on the coldest winter nights, I still hear strange voices in the wind. And when I do, I make sure to keep a piece of copper in my pocket, just in case. My name is John Hawkins, and what I'm about to tell you happened to me back in 1962. I still get chills thinking about those nights in Bighorn National Forest, Wyoming. After serving 10 years as a Marine Scout, I thought I'd seen it all, but boy, was I wrong. I was 41 then, working as a forest ranger at Shadow Ridge. It was a peaceful job, or at least it was supposed to be. Most days, I'd patrol the trails, help lost hikers, and make sure campers weren't getting into trouble. The local folks knew me as the tough but friendly ranger who always had a story to share over coffee at Mary's Diner in town. The forest was my second home, and I knew every trail, every creek, and every mountain peak like the back of my hand. The towering pine trees, the crisp mountain air, and the sound of elk in the distance. It was paradise. Even the local Crow tribe members would often stop by my station for a chat, sharing their ancient stories about the land. But everything changed that autumn. What started with a few strange animal calls at night turned into something that still haunts my dreams. I've kept this story to myself for years, afraid people would think I'm crazy. But now, I feel it's time to share what really happened in those dark woods of Shadow Ridge. Let me tell you about the time I faced something that shouldn't exist, something that made this old Marine question everything he knew about the natural world. This is the story of the Night Stalker of Shadow Ridge, and I swear on my life, every word of it is true. It all started on a chilly October morning. I was doing my usual rounds when old Bill Thompson, one of our local ranchers, came running to my station. His face was white as a sheet. "John, something's killed 3 of my cattle," he said, his hands shaking as he held his hat. "But this ain't no normal predator attack. They were different." I grabbed my gear and followed Bill to his ranch. What I saw there made my stomach turn. The cattle weren't just killed, they were carefully cut open, almost like surgery. No blood around them, no signs of struggle. In my 20 years of dealing with mountain lions and bears, I'd never seen anything like this. That same week, I found the tracks. At first, I thought someone was playing a prank. They looked like wolf prints, but massive, nearly 8 feet apart. Whatever made them was walking on 2 legs, not 4. I took photos and measurements, but nobody could explain what kind of animal could make tracks like these. Then came the howls. Not your regular wolf howls. These were different. They started like a wolf's cry, but changed into something that sounded almost human, like someone trying to talk. The sound would echo through the valleys at night, making even the bravest ranch dogs hide under porches. The local Crow tribe elders started visiting me more often. Old Joseph, their medicine man, would sit in my office, his weathered face serious as he spoke about the Dark Walker. He said their people had known about it for generations, a creature that walked the line between man and beast, appearing when nature's balance was disturbed. "Be careful, John," Joseph warned me one evening. "The Dark Walker isn't just an animal. It knows things. It thinks. And now it's marking its territory." I didn't want to believe him at first. But as I sat in my cabin that night, listening to those strange howls getting closer to town, a chill ran down my spine. Something was out there in my forest, something I couldn't explain, and it was getting bolder. Little did I know, these were just the first signs of what was about to become the most terrifying experience of my life. The first time I saw it, I was doing my night patrol near Medicine Mountain. My flashlight caught something moving between the trees, something big. At first, I thought it was a bear standing on its hind legs, but when it turned, God help me. It was about 9 feet tall, with a body like a man but a head like a wolf. Its amber eyes glowed in my flashlight beam, and for a moment I couldn't move. It was like those eyes had frozen me in place. The creature's dark fur was matted, and its hands, if you could call them that, had claws longer than my hunting knife. "Hello, Ranger," it seemed to say in a voice that sounded just like Bill Thompson's. But Bill was miles away in town. That's when I realized this thing could copy human voices. I slowly reached for my rifle, but it moved faster than anything that size should. In one leap, it cleared 30 feet between us. I fired a shot, but it was already gone, leaving behind only deep claw marks in the trees and that horrible, human-like laugh echoing through the forest. Back at the station, I wrote everything down, my hands still shaking. The locals started calling it the dogman. Some laughed at the name, saying I'd seen a big wolf or a bear. But those who'd heard it at night, who'd seen their livestock torn apart, they knew better. Every full moon, things got worse. I'd find dead deer arranged in circles, their bones broken in ways that made no sense. The creature would leave its massive footprints right on my cabin's porch, like it was taunting me. Sometimes I'd hear it walking on my roof at night, its claws scraping against the wood. One evening, I found Sarah, a teenage girl who lived at the edge of town, crying on her porch. She said she'd heard her little brother's voice calling from the woods, but he was away at his grandmother's. When she looked outside, she saw those glowing eyes staring back at her from the tree-line. "It's learning, John," old Joseph told me when I reported these incidents. "It's not just hunting anymore. It's playing with us." The fear in town was growing. People were locking their doors at night, keeping their children inside. Even the wolves, our usual forest residents, seemed to have disappeared. Something had scared them away. And then the hunters started going missing. The first hunter to disappear was Mike Collins, an experienced woodsman who'd lived here his whole life. They found his rifle snapped in half like a twig, and signs of a struggle that led deep into the woods. But no Mike. 2 days later, Tom Wilson and his son went missing too. Their campsite looked like it had been hit by a tornado. Then came the night of the ranger station attack. I was working late, going through missing persons reports, when I heard something heavy land on my roof. The whole building shook. I grabbed my rifle and waited, heart pounding. That's when I heard it, my own voice, calling from outside. "Help! Somebody help!" it yelled, using my exact voice. But I was sitting right there, silent and terrified. The windows exploded inward. Not one, but 3 massive shapes crashed through. 3 dogmen, each bigger than the last. Their amber eyes filled the dark room, and their breath smelled like death. I fired twice, hitting one in the shoulder. It barely flinched. I made it to my jeep just in time, but not before one of them left 3 deep claw marks across my back. Those scars still burn on cold nights. The next morning, I found something that chilled me to the bone. About 12 feet up the trees around the station, there were claw marks forming a pattern. And in the clearing nearby, 7 dead wolves were arranged in a perfect circle, their heads all pointing to the center. Old Joseph came to see the scene. His face went pale. "They're marking sacred ground," he whispered. "They're claiming the ancient burial grounds up in the mountains. This is worse than I feared." More ranchers reported seeing the creatures near their homes. They were getting closer to town, bolder with each passing day. We found their tracks in people's gardens, heard their mimicked voices calling children's names at night. The town called a meeting. Everyone was scared, angry, and looking for answers. That's when Bob Miller, our town's best hunter, stood up and said what we were all thinking: we need to hunt these things down before they hunt us. 20 men volunteered for the hunting party. If only we'd known what we were really walking into. We set out at dawn, 20 brave men armed with rifles and silver bullets that old Joseph had blessed. Bob Miller led the group, while I tracked the creatures using my marine training. The trail led us up toward the ancient burial grounds in the mountains. Looking back, we were so foolish. We thought we were the hunters that day. We didn't realize we were being led into a trap. The first sign of trouble came when our radios stopped working. Then the fog rolled in, thick and unnatural. That's when we heard it, our own voices, calling from different directions, trying to split us up. "Help! Over here! I found something! Quick! This way!" Some men panicked and ran toward the voices. That's when the attack began. The dogmen moved like shadows in the fog. I heard screams, gunshots, and those terrible howls. Bob Miller fired his rifle at a shape in the mist, but another creature grabbed him from behind. 5 men died in the first few minutes. I managed to get a clear shot at one dogman. The silver bullet hit it in the chest, and it howled in pain, our first sign that these things could be hurt. But it wasn't enough to kill it. Through the chaos, I spotted something important. The largest dogman, clearly the alpha, was directing the others. They weren't just animals. They were working together, using strategy. We retreated down the mountain, carrying our wounded. Only 11 men made it back to town. The others, we never found their bodies. That night, as I sat in my cabin cleaning my rifle, old Joseph came to visit. He brought something wrapped in deerskin, an ancient knife with strange symbols carved into the blade. This blade was used by our warriors long ago. He said quietly, "It's been blessed by 100 medicine men. The silver bullets hurt them, but this can kill them. But you must strike the alpha first. Without their leader, the pack will turn on each other." I looked at the knife in my hands. How do I get close enough? Old Joseph's eyes were grave. "You don't find them, John. They find you. And they're already watching us right now." I knew what I had to do. The next full moon, I hiked up to Raven's Cliff alone. The blessed knife was strapped to my belt, and I carried my rifle loaded with silver bullets. Old Joseph had painted sacred symbols on my face and arms for protection. The sun was setting when I reached the cliff edge. I could feel them watching me. The air grew cold, and that familiar, rotten smell filled my nostrils. Then I heard my own voice behind me, mocking me. "Ready to die, Ranger." I turned to face them. All three dogmen emerged from the shadows. The Alpha was massive, at least 10 feet tall, with battle scars across its chest. Its amber eyes locked onto mine, trying to paralyze me with fear. But this time, I was ready. I fired 2 silver bullets into the smaller ones, forcing them back. The Alpha charged at me, faster than lightning. Its claws ripped through my jacket, but I managed to roll away. We fought near the cliff edge, the creature's hot breath on my face. Every time it slashed, I dodged, making it angrier. That's when my plan worked. The Alpha got so angry it forgot about the cliff edge. I ducked under its swing, and it lost its balance. As it stumbled, I grabbed the blessed knife and drove it deep into the Alpha's chest. The howl it let out shook the mountains. The other 2 dogmen watched as their leader fell backward, tumbling over the cliff edge. But something strange happened then. Just like old Joseph predicted, the 2 remaining creatures turned on each other. In their frenzy, they forgot about me. I used my last silver bullets to wound them both. They ran off into the darkness, fighting and tearing at each other as they disappeared into the forest. I never saw them again. The Alpha's body was never found at the bottom of the cliff. Some say it survived and went into hiding. Others think it turned to dust when it died, like in the old stories. I retired from ranger service the following year. My wounds healed, but the nightmares still come sometimes. Every full moon, I lock my doors and windows, and sometimes, on very quiet nights, I swear I can still hear those human-like howls in the distance. The locals don't talk much about what happened at Shadow Ridge anymore. But if you ever visit Bighorn National Forest and hear something calling your name at night, don't answer. And whatever you do, don't look into those amber eyes. My name is Frank Martinez, and what I'm about to tell you happened to me back in 1995 when I was working as a search and rescue ranger in the Pine Barrens of New Jersey. I was 42 then, and I thought I'd seen everything in my 15 years of service. But I was wrong. So terribly wrong. It all started on a chilly October evening. The sun was setting, painting the endless pine trees in shades of orange and red. I was doing my usual patrol, checking the trails and making sure no hikers were lost. The Pine Barrens are tricky, lots of swamps, thick forests, and places where it's easy to lose your way. The first weird thing I noticed was the silence. You see, forests are never really quiet. There's always something, birds chirping, squirrels running around, leaves rustling. But that evening, everything was dead silent. Even my radio seemed quieter than usual. Then came the screams. Not human screams, mind you. Not animal either. It was something in between, like a woman crying and a horse shrieking at the same time. It made my skin crawl and my hair stand on end. My flashlight beam shook as I tried to locate where it was coming from. The next morning, old Bill Johnson, a local farmer, called our station. His sheep were found torn apart, but not like how a bear or wolf would do it. The animals were twisted in impossible ways, with strange marks on their bodies that looked like they were burned into their skin. More reports started coming in. Hikers talked about finding weird tracks in the swamps, not like any animal we knew. They were huge, like horse hooves, but with claw marks at the edges. Children in the nearby town started telling stories about seeing a monster with wings watching them from the trees. At first, I didn't want to believe it. I'm a practical man, always have been. But something was definitely wrong in my forest. The local people started bringing up the old legend of the Jersey Devil. I'd heard the stories before. Everyone who grows up around here does. But now, these tales felt different. They felt real. Little did I know, these were just the beginning signs of something that would change my life forever. Something that would make me question everything I believed in. Something that was watching us from the dark corners of the Pine Barrens, getting ready to show itself. I'll never forget the first time I actually saw it. It was during a night patrol, about a week after those first screams. My flashlight caught something moving between the trees, something big. At first, I thought it was just shadows playing tricks on me, but then it turned and looked right at me. The thing had a head like a horse, but all wrong. Its eyes glowed red like hot coals, and its mouth was filled with teeth that no horse should have. Huge bat-like wings were folded against its body, and its feet, well, they matched those strange tracks we'd been finding. But what really got to me was how it moved, like it was both flying and crawling at the same time. When it saw me, it let out that same awful scream I'd heard before. My whole body went cold, like I'd been dunked in ice water. My flashlight flickered and died, even though I'd just put in new batteries that morning. In the darkness, I could hear it moving closer. I ran. Me, a search and rescue ranger with years of experience, ran like a scared kid. When I got back to my truck, my hands were shaking so bad I could barely get the key in the ignition. The next day, nobody at the station believed me. They thought I was tired or spooked by the dark. But then the animals in the forest started acting strange. Deer were running away from something we couldn't see. Birds would suddenly go quiet and fly away in huge groups. Even the bears seemed scared, leaving their usual areas and moving closer to town, and bears don't do that unless they're really frightened. Local people started telling me their stories. Old Mrs. Rodriguez showed me her chicken coop. All her chickens were dead, with the same burnt marks we'd seen on the sheep. Tommy, the gas station kid, said he saw the creature drinking from the swamp one night, and the water turned black where it touched. But the scariest thing was what it did to people's minds. Anyone who saw it had horrible nightmares. Some folks said they could feel it watching them, even in their homes. Kids started drawing pictures of it at school, all looking exactly the same, even though they'd never talked to each other about it. I knew this was the Jersey Devil from the old stories, but it was worse than any legend. This was real, and it was in my forest. And somehow, I knew it was getting stronger. Every night, its screams got closer to town. Every morning, we found more dead animals. And then, people started reporting missing pets. I had a terrible feeling that soon, it wouldn't just be pets going missing. I needed to do something. But what can one ranger do against something that's not supposed to exist? Things got really bad after that. One night, something attacked our main ranger station. We came in the next morning to find the place torn apart, claw marks on the walls, windows smashed, and those same burning marks everywhere. Our radio equipment was destroyed, and weird symbols were scratched into the desk. Then came the missing children reports. First, it was little Tommy Baker, age 8. He was playing in his backyard one evening when his mom went inside to answer the phone. When she came back 5 minutes later, he was gone. Just vanished. We searched everywhere, but all we found was one of his shoes near the edge of the woods, and those burning marks on a nearby tree. 2 days later, Sarah Chen disappeared from the playground at Pine Grove Elementary. Then Michael Ross from the trailer park. Each time, we found the same clues, those marks on the trees, like the devil was leaving us a message. I started noticing patterns. The devil always attacked on cloudy nights. It seemed stronger near the old parts of the forest, especially around this one area where people said Native Americans used to perform rituals hundreds of years ago. And the missing kids, they all said they'd been having nightmares about a horse-headed monster before they disappeared. My team was falling apart. Steve got so sick he couldn't work after finding those symbols. Lisa started having panic attacks every time we went into the forest. Even my old dog Max, who'd been with me on hundreds of searches, wouldn't go near the woods anymore. One evening, I was looking through some old town records when I found something interesting. Every 30 years, exactly, similar things had happened. Kids going missing, animals acting strange, people seeing the creature. The last time was in 1965, and before that 1935. Now it was 1995, and it was happening again. But this time felt different. Worse. Like the devil was done hiding and ready to do something big. I started marking every sighting, every animal attack, and every missing person on a map. When I connected the dots, they made a pattern, like a big spiral, getting closer and closer to the center of the Pine Barrens. Right where those old ruins were. That's when I knew what I had to do. I had to go to those ruins. Maybe those kids were there. Maybe there was a way to stop this thing. But I also knew it would be the most dangerous thing I'd ever done. I gathered my team, the few who were still able to work. We loaded up with everything we could think of: flashlights, radios, flares, first aid kits. Someone even brought their grandfather's old Bible, saying it might help. As we got ready to head out, I looked at their scared faces and wondered how many of us would make it back. We headed into the forest at sunset. There were 5 of us, me, Mike, Jenny, Carlos, and Dave. The ruins were about 3 miles deep into the darkest part of the Pine Barrens. As we walked, the trees seemed to close in around us, like they were watching our every move. Our flashlights started acting weird about halfway there. They'd flicker on and off, even though we'd packed extra batteries. The air got colder, and this strange mist started rolling in. It wasn't natural. It moved against the wind, almost like it was alive. Then we heard the children crying. It came from everywhere and nowhere at the same time. Some of the voices sounded like Tommy and Sarah, but there were older voices too, maybe from kids who went missing years ago. Carlos wanted to run toward the sounds, but I stopped him. "That's what it wants," I said. "It's trying to trap us." When we finally reached the ruins, what we saw made my blood freeze. The old stone walls were covered in those burning marks, glowing faintly in the dark. But worse than that were the nests, huge tangles of branches and bones, built into the corners of the ruins. And in those nests, "Oh God," Jenny whispered, "there's more than one of them." She was right. We could see smaller versions of the Jersey Devil baby ones, sleeping in the nests. They looked like twisted, half-formed things, with little wings and sharp teeth. The missing kids' backpacks and shoes were scattered around, but the children themselves were nowhere to be seen. That's when the mother showed up. It came down from the sky like a shadow, bigger than I remembered. Its wings spread out wider than a car, and its eyes burned so bright they left trails in the darkness. The baby devils woke up and started making this horrible chirping sound. Everything happened so fast after that. Dave tried to run and got caught in some kind of invisible force, like the air itself was holding him. Mike fired his flare gun, but the devil dodged it like it was nothing. Jenny started reading from the Bible, and that actually seemed to make the creature angry. The devil's tail whipped around, knocking Carlos into a wall. When it screamed this time, I felt something in my mind trying to break. Images flashed through my head, horrible things I never want to see again. But then I noticed something. Every time Jenny read from the Bible, the burning marks on the walls flickered. And when she read near the nests, the baby devils shrieked in pain. That's when I realized what we had to do. But I knew not all of us would survive what came next. "Jenny!" I shouted over the chaos. "Keep reading. Everyone else, get the flares ready." I had a crazy idea. Those burning marks weren't just markings, they were keeping something locked up. Something the devil was afraid of. Every time Jenny read from the Bible, they got weaker. But the devil knew what we were doing. It flew straight at Jenny, its claws reaching for her. Mike jumped in the way, pushing her aside. I'll never forget his scream as the devil's claws caught him. Dave tried to help, but the invisible force threw him against a tree. He didn't get up. Carlos and I shot our flares at the nests while Jenny kept reading, her voice shaking but not stopping. The baby devils screeched and scattered. The mother devil went crazy, flying around and smashing into the ruins, trying to stop us. That's when the marks on the walls started breaking apart. Light poured out from behind them, not regular light, but something old and powerful. The devil tried to fly away, but it was too late. The light wrapped around it like ropes. For the first time, I heard the devil make a sound that wasn't a scream. It was crying, like it was afraid. The light got brighter and brighter until I had to close my eyes. When I opened them again, the devil was gone. The nests were empty. The marks on the walls had disappeared. But so had Mike and Dave. We found the missing kids later, hidden in a cave under the ruins. They were scared but alive. They couldn't remember much, just bad dreams about a horse-headed monster. Carlos quit the next day. Jenny transferred to another park. I stayed, but I was never the same. Sometimes, on dark nights, I still hear screams in the distance. And every now and then, hikers report seeing strange tracks or burning marks on trees. I keep the Bible Jenny used in my truck now, just in case. Because I'm not sure we really destroyed the Jersey Devil that night. Maybe we just sent it away for another 30 years. Maybe in 2025 it'll come back again. But this time we know what to do. This time we'll be ready. I still work in the Pine Barrens. Someone has to keep watch. Someone has to remember what happened. Because the devil is real, and the forest keeps its secrets. And if you're ever hiking in the Pine Barrens and everything goes quiet, if you feel like something's watching you, if you hear a scream that sounds almost human but not quite, run. Run as fast as you can. Because not everyone gets as lucky as I did that night in 1995. My name is Daniel Cooper, and this happened to me back in 1989 when I was working as a park ranger in the Great Smoky Mountains. I was 39 then, and being a herpetologist, that's someone who studies reptiles and amphibians, I thought I had seen everything there was to see in these mountains. But boy, was I wrong. It all started on a chilly October morning. The mist was doing what it always does in the Smokies, hanging low and thick between the mountains, making everything look like it was floating in a sea of clouds. I'd been getting strange reports from hikers and campers about weird lights in the valleys at night. At first, I thought it was just people playing around with flashlights or maybe some campfires that weren't supposed to be there. But then I started finding these odd pieces of evidence, large scales stuck to tree bark, some bigger than my hand. The local wildlife was acting strange too. The snakes, which I knew better than the back of my hand, were hiding deeper in their dens than usual. Even the birds seemed scared, and that's when I knew something wasn't right. One evening, while I was checking these reports, I met an old Cherokee man on the trail. He looked at me with these wise, knowing eyes and said, "The sky serpents are waking up." When I asked him what he meant, He told me stories passed down through generations about massive creatures that used to rule these skies. I remember laughing it off then, but looking back, I should have paid more attention. I had no idea that this was just the beginning of something that would change my life forever, and make me question everything I thought I knew about nature and science. It was about a week later when I saw it for the first time. I was up on one of the higher trails, checking on some reports of missing hikers. The sky was getting dark, even though it was only mid-afternoon. At first, I thought a storm was coming, which wasn't unusual in these mountains. But something felt different this time. That's when I heard it, a sound I'll never forget. It was like thunder, but somehow alive. Looking up, I saw something that made my heart stop. Through a break in the clouds, there was this massive shape gliding overhead. Its wingspan must have been at least 30 feet, bigger than any bird I'd ever seen or read about. But what really got me was how it looked. It had feathers all right, but they seemed to shimmer with an electrical blue color, and its skin underneath looked almost reptilian, like a snake's. As it flew overhead, I felt all the hair on my arms stand up, like during a lightning storm. Small birds in the trees around me went completely silent, then suddenly flew in the same direction as this thing. It was like they were being controlled by it. I tried to take pictures, but my camera wouldn't work. Neither would my radio. It was like all electronic devices just died when this creature was nearby. I grabbed my notebook instead and started sketching everything I could remember. My hands were shaking so bad I could barely write. That night, I couldn't sleep. I kept thinking about all those Cherokee legends, about the sky serpents and ancient guardians of the mountains. What if they weren't just stories? What if something had been living in these mountains all along, something we'd written off as myth? The next morning, I found more evidence. There were huge claw marks on trees near the trail, and patches of ground that looked like they'd been scorched by lightning, except there hadn't been any storm. I collected some strange feathers too, unlike anything I'd ever seen. They seemed to give off a slight static charge when touched. I knew I should report this to someone, but who would believe me? A giant flying creature that controls birds and creates electricity? They'd think I'd lost my mind. But I knew what I saw, and I knew I had to investigate further, even if it meant putting myself in danger. Little did I know, things were about to get much worse over the next few days. I started putting together all the pieces of this puzzle. More and more hikers were going missing, not just getting lost, but completely disappearing. I marked all the spots where people had vanished on my map, and it made a strange pattern, like a circle around one of the highest peaks in the mountains. The weirdest thing was the lightning. We'd see bright flashes and hear thunder, but the sky would be completely clear. No clouds, no storm, nothing. It didn't make any sense. I'd been studying nature all my life, but this was something entirely different. One morning, I decided to climb up to that peak. It was a tough hike, and the higher I went, the more nervous I felt. The air seemed to crackle with electricity. My compass went crazy, spinning in all directions. That's when I found it, the nest. It was massive, bigger than my truck, made of huge branches and what looked like metal pieces from old planes and helicopters. The ground around it was scorched black, and there were bones scattered everywhere, mostly deer and bears, but some looked human. Near the nest, I discovered something even more incredible. Hidden behind some rocks was an old stone circle, covered in ancient Cherokee carvings. They showed the same creature I'd seen, the Thunderbird. There were drawings of people bowing to it, offering gifts. This wasn't just some random animal. It was something the Cherokee people had known about for centuries. I was taking pictures of the carvings when my camera suddenly died again. The air got heavy, like right before a big storm. That familiar thunder-like sound filled the air. I knew it was coming back, and I was too far from any shelter. My hands were shaking as I pulled out my notebook one last time. If anything happened to me, I wanted someone to know what I'd found. The sound got louder and louder. I could feel the electricity in the air making my skin tingle. Then everything went dark as a huge shadow passed overhead. What happened next still gives me nightmares. The Thunderbird didn't just attack me. It went straight for the nearby town. I ran down the mountain as fast as I could, trying to warn everyone, but it was too late. The creature was enormous against the darkening sky, its wings creating gusts of wind strong enough to knock over trees. As it flew over the town, bolts of lightning shot from its body, hitting power lines and transformers. The whole town went dark in minutes. I could hear people screaming, car alarms going off, and the constant boom of thunder. The National Guard came in with helicopters, but they were useless. Every time they got close, their electronics would fail, and they'd have to turn back. The creature seemed to feed off their weapons' electricity, getting stronger with each attack. It was like watching a monster movie, except this was real, and people I knew were getting hurt. I knew I had to do something. While everyone was focused on fighting the Thunderbird, I remembered the ancient worship site I'd found. There had to be a reason why the Cherokee people built it. I ran to the local Cherokee community and showed them my pictures of the carvings. An elder named Sarah recognized the symbols right away. "This is a warning," she said. "The Thunderbird is a guardian. Someone must have disturbed its sacred ground." She told me about an old ritual that could calm the creature, but it had to be done at the stone circle, right by its nest. The town was in chaos. Buildings were on fire, the power was completely out, and the sky was full of constant lightning. I knew what I had to do, even though it terrified me. With Sarah's help, I learned the ritual words and gathered what we needed. As I climbed back up that mountain, with the Thunderbird still attacking below, I felt like my heart would burst out of my chest. The ritual had to work. It was our only hope. But getting close enough to perform, it meant facing the creature head-on. I could see its glowing eyes in the darkness ahead, and electricity crackling all around its massive body. This was it. Either I would save the town, or I wouldn't live to tell about it. The final moments of that night are both clear and blurry in my mind. I reached the stone circle, my hands clutching the sacred items Sarah had given me, some tobacco, sage, and an ancient Cherokee medallion. The thunderbird was right there, perched on its nest, its eyes glowing like blue fire in the darkness. I started the ritual, speaking the Cherokee words Sarah had taught me. My voice was shaking, but I kept going. The creature turned its massive head toward me, and I could feel electricity crackling through the air. Every part of me wanted to run, but I stood my ground. Then everything happened so fast. The thunderbird launched itself at me, lightning exploding all around us. I held up the medallion, still chanting. A bolt of lightning struck my right arm. The pain was unbelievable. But somehow, I managed to finish the ritual. The strangest thing happened then. The thunderbird stopped, hovering in mid-air. The lightning around it became softer, more like a gentle glow. It looked at me with those ancient eyes, and for a moment I felt like I could understand it. It wasn't evil, it was just protecting its home, just like it had done for thousands of years. Slowly, the creature flew up into the clouds. The lightning stopped, and a peaceful quiet fell over the mountains. My right arm was badly hurt. The doctors later had to remove it, but I knew I was lucky to be alive. The town recovered, though people don't talk much about what happened that night. The government declared the area around the peak a no-fly zone, saying it was for environmental reasons. I kept my job as a ranger, but now I have a special task, making sure no one disturbs the thunderbird's territory. Sometimes, on stormy nights, I see flashes of blue lightning above the mountain peak. I know it's still up there, watching, protecting. I lost my arm that night, but I gained something too, an understanding that there are things in this world beyond what we can explain, things that deserve our respect and protection. The Cherokee people were right all along. Some mysteries are meant to stay mysteries, and some guardians are meant to keep watching over their ancient lands, even in our modern world.